Hi, and welcome to Your Prosperity, a podcast series on financial topics including tax, wealth creation, superannuation, lending, audit, and many other things that we deal with here on a regular basis at Prosperity Advisors. As with all financial podcasts, any advice you hear in this is general in nature and not to be relied upon. Please contact us for any specific advice. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today is the 15th of November, 2022. I'm here with John Mujic, and we're going to talk to you about transition to retirement. John's one of our financial advisors, deals a lot in this space, and there's probably just been a few changing rules over the last 10 years or so, but there's some concessions, I'll call them, about transitioning to retirement, where it helps you gain access to your money and super fund maybe a little bit earlier than you normally would have, or just before you retire, which aptly named Transition to Retirement. So, John, thanks for joining us on the podcast, and let's talk about transition to retirement.
Sounds good, Brendan. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So give us a brief overview. I guess some might know a little bit about how this works, but hopefully my intro was about right, that it's transitioning to retirement, helps you pull a bit of money out of your super in a bit of a tax-effective way. Used to be a lot more tax-effective. I don't think it quite is it is now. But still a good option for some. Talk us through some of the basics, John. How does it work?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first thing to remember is, as you mentioned, the rules have changed quite a bit, and they do most years whenever the budget gets announced. All financial advisors are very interested to see what's changing in the world of retirement and superannuation specifically. So
yeah, it's an easy target, isn't it? Sometimes for sort of politicians to tweak super and play with super, but.
No,
yeah,
that's right. So you really got to keep your eye on the ball. So it's a massive step for people to go through. I mean, we spend most of our lives working. And retirement's a big transition. So I guess the first thing you really got to work out is when do you plan on retirement, or maybe you haven't planned, but it's been thrust upon you. And you work from there. That is a starting point in determining, can you afford to retire, or what's your goals in retirement? What do you need to live off, and work from there. So once you have the date set, or a rough idea of a date, next step is to work out how much you think you'll need to live off, whether that's a weekly or fortnightly or annual amount, and then how you hope to fund that, whether it's you're fully self-funded retiree, or whether there's, you'll be eligible for the benefits like the age pension or Commonwealth Seniors Healthcare Card, and you might not be eligible for that initially, but down the track, if you're using up your savings, you may be eligible for those benefits down the track. So they're all things you need to think about when determining or looking at retirement.
I find it interesting you say, and I'm sure you come across this a lot more than I do being a financial planner, but it's amazing. You can see someone on 300 grand a year, and then they say, I'm retiring in 3 years. And it's like, how much will you live off? 30, 40 a year should be enough. And, that everyone assumes that when they go to retirement, somehow they're not spending the money they were spending.
No,
I feel they always underestimate how much it actually costs. Do you find that, or what's the norms out there?
Yeah, no, I definitely find that most people think they're not going to spend anywhere near as much as they do. But when you actually think about it, what cuts are you going to make? Especially if you own your home outright, then there's you're not paying any further in debt repayments. There's probably not a lot you're going to cut back on, and what you do, you might spend on additional holidays or something like that. In retirement, or the grandkids, which is another big one.
Hopefully a lot less in tax in a lot of situations, but that's about it really. Once you hit that retirement age and you're pulling out some tax-free money, well, that's a big advantage.
Exactly right. Sorry. Yeah, I forgot to mention. So what I normally say to people is, we work out their current, people that are looking to retire and haven't got there yet, we work out their current living expenses, and that's less tax and less debt repayments if there's not going to be any debt at that time. So you can work backwards there and work out what are your living expenses now, okay, and is that going to be likely to continue in retirement? And there's also some industry data. So the Australian Super Fund Association have put together some data and do each year on average living needs in retirement, and they sort of categorize people or couples into two separate categories: comfortable, comfortable living needs versus modest living needs. And I mean, the number's different for everyone, but it just gives a ballpark.
Do they do any that involve yachts, or is that's a different category?
That's a different category. Yeah. They don't factor that in, but I mean, as a rough example, for a couple, they say a comfortable retirement will live off roughly 66,000 a year, whereas for a single, that's closer to 50,000, and then a modest living is 50,000 for a couple and about 30,000 for a single.
And I guess there's just costs in there. I guess if you think about it, hopefully your house is paid off, as you say, and you don't have that many more costs, but you've still got a car, you've still got to eat, you've still got insurances, you've still got things you have to pay for, subscriptions, memberships, all those sort of things. And rates on the house, all that sort of stuff, repairs and maintenance, everything's still there.
Yeah, exactly right. So
if someone's looking at that, I guess, and we should stick to our topic, transition to retirement. Don't let me sway you away from that. Apologies. So how does that transition to retirement phase work? So if you've worked out what their cost of living is going to cost in retirement, and then you're working out their numbers, and they might say to you, I'm the client, I might say, well, I'm not quite ready to retire yet, but I'm happy with those numbers, and my fund can support me if I retire for that 60 grand a year, say. What if I stepped away a couple of years early and I met these transition to retirement rules? Could I do sort of, maybe 3 days a week instead of 5 and pull a bit from super to pop me up? How does that work in this scenario?
Yeah, exactly right. So you can start to access your super once you reach preservation age. So you don't have to retire. You just you can start to access from preservation age. It used to be 55. It's now been scaled up to 60. So even if you're working, you can start to access your super through a transition to retirement pension. So while you're working, you're in what we call accumulation phase when you're building up your super. And then once you reach that preservation age, you can move it to pension phase, but a special type of pension if you're still working called a transition to retirement pension. It looks and feels very similar to a super to your accumulation fund, but you can start to draw an income stream, maximum 10% a year, there's rules where if you can draw a little bit out, but I won't go into too much detail. A little bit 10%. I won't go into too much detail there, but that's a starting point where you can start to access those funds.
And how does the tax work on that? John, how does that sort of play out? How do you have to? These are obviously things you've got to factor in. Yeah. So what's the steps in that?
Yep. So once you reach age 60 and you start to access your super, it's all tax free. So you don't pay any tax there. Within the fund itself, there is tax payable on the earnings on the investments within the fund. So in accumulation phase, that's 15%. Taxed within the fund. Once you move to transition to retirement phase, it used to be 0%, but they've increased that to 15% also. And then once you move to an account-based pension, when you meet a full condition of release, the earnings within the super fund are 0%.
So it's still not a bad option, really. If you were 5 days a week, you're pretty sure you've got enough in your fund when you retire. You've had enough. You're like, well, what if I drop back to 3 days and then I can pull out some of it tax-free, say 10% of my balance, hopefully maybe not that much, but you pull out a bit of it tax-free, and that can supplement those other 2 days, I guess, that you're not working, which will, help you transition into that retirement phase, and you can start joining the bowls club and the golf club while you're doing it. That's, I guess, it's exactly what it's designed for, and it's good that there's still a bit of an advantage there. Yeah, you're paying 15% on the earnings, but that's still pretty good.
Yeah, exactly, and you'd be paying that 15% in accumulation phase anyway. So
so even if you didn't draw it, you'd still be paying that in there.
Yep. No, that's right. So you see it used quite a bit for those who don't want to retire. Move from full time to full retirement. They might want to reduce hours and get a feel for what life will be like, and ease their way into it, then the transition to retirement pension is a great option to supplement that lost income.
And even if you're doing that, you can still contribute money to your super fund under the caps, etc. So I guess some people use that as a bit of a strategy as well, where you're sort of pulling a bit out tax-free, but then you're also putting some back in at the same, getting a tax deduction at the same time, which is probably a bit of a strategy I'd imagine some people use.
It is, yeah, that's right. So you don't have to reduce hours to set up a transition to retirement pension. You can continue working full time, set up a transition to retirement pension, access up to 10% a year, and recontribute those funds back into super and claim as a tax deduction.
So obviously if the advice is important in this regard, but in that regard, if it did sort of work for you, if you didn't have the money to keep putting into super, it might be a good way to get it out tax-free and put it in with a deduction. Probably a bit of a benefit there as well. There should be some other reasons for it, but that's a handy little advantage you can gain.
That's right. Yeah, that's the key there. If you've got additional cash or other funds you can use to contribute to super, maybe worth considering using that. But there is always the option of starting to access your super and the ability to contribute funds back in. And
this isn't I guess a lot of things sort of it's good for one class of the society and not the other, but I don't think that's the case with this. You don't have to have a self-managed fund. You can do this through other funds. It doesn't have to be. It can be retail. It can be one of these ones. I'm here I am giving hand signals on a podcast, but one of those industry funds and retail funds and self-managed super funds, they can all access it, can't they?
That's right. Yeah. The vast majority do. There are certain funds that don't give the option of a transition to retirement fund, so it's worth having a look into that or seeking advice if necessary. But I think the vast majority of them now do offer the option of the transition to retirement pension.
Yeah, and I guess the big thing about super, while we're saying pull money out of super, but you touched on something a few seconds ago. I think it's important to note that if you do have excess funds, it likely is better that you just put that in and get a tax deduction against your own income, because the more money you can leave in super until you retire, unless you've got millions and millions in there and it's not an issue, but the more money you can leave in there, the better tax efficient rate it's going to be. So I'd rather be paying tax at 15% in my super fund than, say you're earning 200 grand in your own name, or you're going to be paying tax at 47% on that. So you'd be much better off on whatever it makes. I'm talking about here, obviously any interest or any shares or dividends or whatever. You'd be much better off earning that in a super fund, considering you're very close to being able to access that. You assume it's probably better to have that money in a fund and be able to earn the money in there and pay the tax at only 15%. And then, as I love with super funds, once you do flick that final switch and you're no longer transitioning and you go into retirement and you're on no longer in accumulation, but you're in pension phase, well, we're tax free effectively, aren't we?
No, exactly right. And no, you're spot on there. That the once you're getting close to preservation age 60, there's that preservation issue starts to dissipate. So super is a great tax environment to save for retirement. The blocker before 60 is the access issue. But once you're over 60, that starts to go, as you've got access to your super. Start to get access to your super. And one of the other blockers people have is from moving cash from cash at bank to their super, is they're worried about the volatility. Super's, it doesn't always go up, but you have a lot of flexibility with how you invest your money in your super fund. Even within the industry funds, you could hold your balance in cash if you wanted to, or part of your balance in cash. So I wouldn't let that be a blocker to moving funds into super. You've got a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess another thing I always know too that I think it's worth referencing. I hate it when you hear someone occasionally say, I can pull out my super now, and the first thing I want to do is pull it all out. I think you might be able to get it out tax free, but then you've got to do something with it. And if you pull it out and then invest it in your own name, you're going to go back to paying tax on it. Leave it in the fund. You go into pension phase, don't pay tax on it. Obviously, if there's that, $1.7 million cap, if you've got more than that in super, you do pay 15% on the excess above that. But, that again, it's at 15% and it's only on the excess above that 1.7. So not a big deal, but I guess it's super to me is always that place of even if you've got access, or particularly when you've got access to it, you're better off leaving it in there and pulling it out as you need it, because you have that, as you said, you've got that flexibility. It can be invested in cash, shares, whatever. Maybe if you want a property in there through a self-managed fund, you can even have through some of the retail funds. I know you and the other advisors often sort of use one of those platforms where the client can even choose some of the shares themselves if they've got a particular interest in that and they want to get a bit involved. It's maybe you do 70% of it and they have 30% of the fund. They choose some of the investments, they get to play with it, they do all of that sort of stuff. As long as it's done through the right platforms and reported correctly and done, leave it all in super. Why pay tax on it, on the earnings when you don't necessarily have to?
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And it's just something you need to educate people, clients on. I think there's a bit of a conception there that your super's for retirement. So once you hit retirement, it's in the bank. It's your you pull it out, but that's often not to your benefit. And like you touched on, and there's plenty of flexibility there within the super fund as to how you want to hold it, invest it. There's the different types of funds, the industry funds where you've got very basic options, the retail funds where you've got a little bit more flexibility, more investment options, direct shares, term deposits, managed funds, and then self-managed super funds where you've got even more flexibility as well.
And probably something I was saying, and I'll give you guys a plug, Mujic, I guess when you're getting close or you're thinking about moving towards that retirement age, it's really good time to talk to your financial advisor, because there's a lot of things you can do leading into it to make sure you get those balances right. There's contributions and recontribution strategies. There's, you can access downsizer provisions without even downsizing your house. If you're moving house, you might be able to access downsizer and get more into super. But just making sure that you're getting everything set up and in the right super funds and the right balance between yourself and your spouse, or how you need to work it out. And I guess there's a lot of options, and even things like insurance. A lot of people have their insurance in super, and it's important for them to look at that, because often, the thing I find a bit funny sometimes is a lot of people look at their insurances, their income protections leading into their 20s, 30s, 40s, which is great. But sometimes those policies do expire when you're 60, and maybe when you're 55, you should be considering, do I back out of this a touch now, and do I start reducing that because it's not going to pay out as much? And it's important to really talk to the right people to make sure that you are getting ready for retirement, you're planning for it. You might put in a transition to retirement, you might do a downsizer, you might review your insurances, or you might look at your contributions and your recontribution strategies. And I'm sure that's just top of my head, so I'm sure there's another dozen things you're running over in your head at the moment, Huge. But rather won't go into all of those. But I guess the key takeaway, I think, is that transition to retirement is a strategy that's out there that you can use. And it's really important that don't think of pension and retirement as just, I'm 60, 65, whatever it is. You can really plan for it, move into it, and set it up right. And I think talking to a planner well beforehand is probably a good idea too, just from that, as we talked about at the start, John. It's about, how much will I be able to retire on what I've got at the moment? What does that mean? And if I die at 70, this all works, but what if I live to 90?
No, exactly. It's what you have at retirement at that time is, unless you're very, very lucky, or there's some sort of inheritance or something like that, that's what you've got for the rest of your life to live on. So planning becomes very important. And you mentioned it there as well. At that time, especially from ages 60 to 65, 67, there are so many different things you can do with your super and getting more money in. There's ways you can. There's estate planning things you can do as well. To look at, and benefits to access. There's a lot there. It's one of the, I guess, if you hadn't received, we always prefer, or suggest people receive financial advice, as early as possible. But if you haven't, retirement's definitely a a highly recommended time to receive advice, or at least talk to a financial advisor. You can usually talk to one, free of charge, and initial meeting, and they can...
I thought you're offering free services all around there.
No. But and you will just see the range of different things you can do to save tax, to set your investments up right, and move into pension phase smoothly, and with an income stream that'll support you through. So
and I guess the takeaway is pension is not, or retirement is not the trigger point to look at this. It's really beforehand, so you can transition to it, plan for it, get it right, and have peace of mind that you know that you will have enough when you do get there. So definitely a good idea.
And that last point you made, there's a big one. So I have a lot of clients, even in retirement, who are concerned, am I going to have enough? Am I going to have enough? It's the biggest concern. So we've got, modeling tools and ways to help ease clients' concerns as to whether they will have enough. And we can help plan things out.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, look, I'll keep it a short podcast, but thank you very much for joining me on that. If anyone's got any questions, they can reach out and contact you or one of the other advisors at Prosperity. So really hope everyone out there enjoyed it. For more information about you, John, email will be the best, I'm assuming. We'll put it all in the notes, but jmujic at prosperity.com.au, and I'll be bcampbell at prosperity.com.au. For more content, variety of topics encompassing your financial prosperity, please like this, share this, tell your friends about it, get the word out, and subscribe to the series. So, John, thanks very much for joining us and talking about transition to retirement.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks for joining us for today's podcast. Hopefully you liked it, and if so, please give us a few stars, like and share. And if you'd like to follow the series, please subscribe and pass any information on to your friends as well if you think they might like it. For more information about who we are, head to prosperity.com.au and follow the links.